Now we're starting section D of the syllabus. We've covered section A, we've covered section B and C. And let me just quickly do a revision of the syllabus summary. Remember I said audit you can summarize just like a project, which you have to plan, you execute, and finally you report. Planning is your section B. Execute is section C and D, and reporting is section E. However, you can't just do any of these as you like. There are standards, frameworks, and guidelines on how you do each of these. And all of that is summarized into your section A, which is on audit framework and regulations. And that's where you see likes of your ISAs, your code of conduct, your professional ethics, and all of that. Right. So now, very nice. We've been able to deal with this. We've dealt with this as well, which is internal control. That is done. Now D is what we are starting today, and that is on audit evidence. So we want to gather audit evidence. But before we can start gathering evidence, what we've done is we've been able to plan. So we have planned. And when we were planning, what are we trying to achieve? What we are trying to do during planning is to identify the areas we want to test. So we are asking ourselves, what should we test? What balances are material to test? Which areas should we focus on the audit? We've done our risk assessment. We've done those ISA 315, understanding our client and its environment. We've determined materiality. All of that we've done during planning. Then we move to section C, which is internal control. So internal control we've also tested. And what are we trying to achieve when we did internal controls? We want to see whether controls are operating effectively and they have also been effectively designed. Right? So here what we have done, we've done evaluation, which is where we check the design of the control. And we've done testing, which means when we did evaluation, we found that some controls have been very well designed, so we tested them. And here, this is operating effectiveness that we're checking. Whether the controls is being operated as designed. Now, once we've tested the controls, our objective of testing is to check for reliance. Whether we as auditors can actually rely on these controls. Have they been designed well? Are they operating very well? All of this will be able to give us comfort on reliance. And why is reliance so important? Reliance is important because that will tell us how much work we have to do on what we have identified here. So this is about what we should test, but controls will now tell us how much work we have to do. How much work? Do we need to do a lot or do we need to do just minimal work? And good controls means minimal work because we can now rely on the control and believe that there will be less problem. So this is less work. However, if the controls are bad, then it's more work, which means we have to do a lot of work. That will be more work. So whether less or more, we must always do substantive testing, and that is why we will now go into substantive testing now. Now I believe you can see how all of these are linked together. So I don't want to jump into substantive testing without giving you this background. So you've seen how we move with the syllabus, what we must have done before substantive testing. But now I want to look at substantive testing. And what are we talking about when we're talking about substantive testing? Our focus is now on the amounts on the financial statements. We want to check those figures. When we're looking at controls, what we're looking at is process. But now we want to look at the figure. Those figures. And remember, those figures, we need evidence to be able to confirm that those figures are correct. We need evidence. So that's why we want to gather evidence now. Because we need those evidence to be able to support the figure on the financial statement. And that is our focus in this video. Because when we have enough evidence, then we can have the assurance that is the overall objective of audit assignment. And what is assurance? Remember, assurance is the comfort that you will get as an auditor. The confidence that you will have that everything is correct, everything is fine. But remember, it's not everything in that sense, because this assurance that we always talk about must be a reasonable assurance, not an absolute assurance, please. It's a reasonable assurance, and reasonable means that you are not testing 100%. You're only going to be looking at items that are significant for the purpose of the audit. And that is why you hear about materiality, which you will have determined during your planning stage. Okay? So, knowing that, we now need to speak about the audit evidence itself. So, how do we gather all this evidence such that we can have reasonable assurance on material items on the financial statement? That is what substantive testing is all about. It's about gathering evidence. So audit evidence itself is your defense, your support to justify your decision, whether the figures are wrong or they are correct, right? And this is guided in ACCA 500 in terms of what do you need to do. So, the first thing you learn is what are the qualities of good evidence. Because you cannot just gather any evidence and say you have audit evidence to support your balance. You need to know how to gather the right evidence, the proper evidence. So when do you say evidence is good? And ACCA 500 told us that there must be 3 qualities of good evidence. It's a must, right? If it is not present, then it's not good. The first is that the evidence must be sufficient. And I'll explain them. It must be reliable, and it must be relevant. These are the 3 qualities of a good audit evidence. SRR must be sufficient, must be reliable, and must be relevant. Let's look at the first one. When do we say audit evidence is sufficient? What does that mean? Simply, what we're saying is that we have enough quantity. This is about quantity of the evidence. We have enough quantity. And what is enough quantity? Is enough sample size. Remember, we're not testing 100%. We're only going to select some samples. Okay? So we have enough sample size to test. That's what we're saying when we say the audit evidence is sufficient. And what will influence this quantity? How do we know what quantity we need to take? There are a lot of factors that might be important. The first one is the risk involved. So, which means if the item is high risk, if the balance is high risk, then we will need high quantity. So quantity must be high. But if it's low risk, then we might not need so much quantity for us to conclude that the audit evidence is sufficient. Okay? Another one is materiality of the balance. That is, how important is this balance? How significant is this balance? If it's very high, which means it's very significant, then likewise, the quantity of samples will be high. And what are we saying when we're talking about high materiality? Remember, during your planning, you must have set materiality level. Materiality level. So take for instance, maybe you set your materiality level at 3 million. If your balance is 3.5 million, you will not need as much evidence as if your balance is 50 million. So this is highly material, which is this is just material because it's just slightly more than 3 million. Remember, anything less than 3 million is not material, so we don't even test. Right? We only test things that are more than 3 million. So this is material, but this is highly material. So this one will require a high quantity of sample, while this one will require low quantity of sample. I hope that is very clear. The third factor that can influence your quantity is the reliability of your evidence. Reliability of the evidence. The more reliable your evidence is, the less quantity you need. So if it's high reliability, then you need low quantity. You don't need so much. And that takes me to the second characteristic of a good audit evidence. How do you know that audit evidence is reliable? So let's talk about reliability. Reliability is determined by two factors. The first one is, where are you getting this audit evidence from? The source. And the second one is, what is the nature of the evidence? These are the two things that determine whether an audit evidence is reliable, which means you can use it, you are confident that it is true evidence. It is not a fake evidence. How do you know? In terms of source, there is hierarchy because there are three groups of sources. The first one is auditors generated source, which means maybe you did the calculation yourself, or you estimated the balance yourself. Yeah, that all. You have external source or third party, which is not coming from your client. There's external third party involvement, like confirmation letters and all of that. And the third one is the client generated evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the hierarchy of your reliability of audit evidence. And what this means is that this is your best, and this is your worst. So which means reliability increases upward. This is how reliable your audit evidence is. That's how reliable it is. So if you have a balance to audit and you have options of getting evidence from external third party or from the client. You as auditor, you are expected to know that this should be your procedure. So even in exams, they ask you to come up with audit procedures, right? And probably you have myriads of audit procedures you can write. The exam asks for just two. You need to go for these types of audit evidence first. Procedures first before you write this one, because these are more reliable sources of audit evidence. You cannot say, I'm asking for GL for audit evidence. That is from the client. Yes, it's audit procedure, but that is not a procedure that will give you comfort that you are looking for. No. You have to go and look for, send a letter to customer to confirm that they are owing the company, or you are calculating what revenue balance should be based on what you know about the industry and about the client business. Those are more rigorous, reliable audit evidence. And when we talk about nature, what are we actually referring to? We are talking about whether the audit evidence is written or whether it's oral, that is verbal. And this is bad. You don't use this. This is good. This is audit evidence that you want, written evidence. You don't want audit evidence that you are saying a client said. No. It has to be a document. You are an auditor. You are asking for a document. You must ask for document. It has to be evidence that someone can see, a signature, approved, an agreement. That is what you are asking for. And if it is written, it can even be considered in two ways. Is it an original copy or is it photocopy? And you always want to go for original copy. But if you don't have original copy, definitely you can still work with photocopy. But this is a better option for you, original copy. So, fantastic. You now see what your audit evidence must look like. It must be sufficient. It must be reliable. Relevance is straightforward. It just means that it is appropriate for the balance that you are testing. You cannot be talking about sending a confirmation letter to customer when you are auditing interest expense. That is not relevant. That doesn't make sense. You can't talk about sending a confirmation letter to bank to confirm the bank balance when you are asked to audit share capital. That doesn't make sense. And likewise, you cannot be looking for confidence, comfort, assurance on an assertion on, take for instance, accuracy. And you are talking about checking financial statement, whether the balance has been presented in the right class of asset. That is not accuracy. That is not relevant for the assertion. Okay, so that is what relevance is all about. And I hope you are following the story. Now, I want to give you a bit of background as to how do you determine what to test. Remember, what to test would have been designed during your planning, all the balances during the planning stage. So you already know what to test based on materiality. And like I always say in my video, please, if you have not watched those planning videos, go and watch them. And internal control. Okay? There are short videos that gives you everything you need to know in a very short time on planning and internal control. Your materiality level is very important. If it is low, then you have so much work to do, because almost everything will be above materiality level. Almost everything will become material. But if your materiality level is high, then there's less work for you to do. Materiality level will be low because the item is very risky, and if level is high, then that means it's a low risky item, right? Because if it's very risky, then you need to test a lot of things, then you need to set your materiality level to be very low, right? And that is why eventually you get to do so much work, right? Now we want to test. Testing procedures, which is where the rubber hits the road. This is where most students struggle. And please note that this is section that you have to be extremely comfortable. Without you being comfortable on this part, it's almost impossible to pass audit paper. Your ability to design procedures is extremely important. So you cannot run away from it. You cannot avoid it. You have to learn it. And you don't have to memorize anything. You need to understand how it is done. And that's why I take a lot of time to explain to you. And you'll see, the approach I'm going to use for this as well is to make you comfortable so that you don't get stuck when you're asked to develop procedures, because a lot of students just struggle to come up with procedures. Now, that's what we want to look at. And where I'm going to start this is to talk about assertions. Without assertions, without good knowledge of assertions, you can't have a good understanding of audit testing, because it's like playing soccer match without a goalpost. How do you know the winner? How do you know the scores? How do you know that you have achieved an objective? That is the essence of assertions. Your assertions are your audit objective. These are your testing objective. This is the comfort that you are looking for. In fact, that is the assurance that you are looking for.